Greetings, I'm going to stop it right there. This is the prelude to the opera Tristan und Isolde by Richard Wagner. And I suggest before you do another thing, you go and listen to the whole prelude. It's about 10 minutes long. Listen to it at least once. I suggest you go to Wikipedia and at very least look up Tristan und Isolde and learn about this mid-19th century opera by Richard Wagner, which is always the place I begin music theory and oral skills for. It is a seminal work and a very important work, and I am going to talk a little bit right now about some of the reasons why, as we begin to think about analyzing this piece of music, this chord right here in the second full measure is probably the most famous chord in all of Western classical music. I know that's sort of an extreme statement, but if you were to go to Wikipedia, if we got off of the Tristan page and I looked up Tristan chord, we would find that it has its own entry, and if we zip down here, these references include entire books about this one chord. Here it is highlighted in red. If you go to Wikipedia, you can listen to it. This is... Anyway, we just did that. So what's the big deal about this chord? Well, if we look at the opening of this piece, and you should read, if you read the entry, you'll learn about the plot of this opera. It's about a star-crossed love affair between a queen and a vassal, and it doesn't end well. They're actually sworn enemies, but they fall in love after drinking a love potion. And the whole opera is really about unrequited love and expectations and desires being unfulfilled. And that's a lot of what you'll hear when you listen to the prelude. You'll hear, unlike earlier music that we may have looked at together, music by Mozart, Haydn, even Beethoven, where there are a lot of neat cadences and periods and structure that you can kind of sink your teeth into and understand where you are in the piece. In this piece, we have a lot of open-ended sounds going from the very beginning here. If we look at this prelude, if we look at the first few bars, we see that there's no key signature, which in 1857, when this was written, would suggest that we're either in the key of A minor or C major. Okay. I know it's not the best sound, but if you zoom into this measure over here, you'll see that we wind up here on a very straightforward E dominant seventh chord, if this A sharp is an accented passing tone. And I'm going to start showing you a few features of note flight. I tend to like to color my non-chord tones. So I'm going to go down, I'm going to click on this, and by the way, I've created a whole note flight intro video, so please take a look at that. For now, I'm going to color this red, and I'll label it too. I'm going to push the T button, which is a quick way of getting to performance text. I'm just going to call that a passing tone. And this chord, if I push the K button above, I can label this chord E7. And we'll just move these things so they're not kind of crashing into each other. Maybe that's good. Let's get the P a little higher. Okay, so now we can see that I've got an E dominant seventh chord, and this is the beginning of a language in this piece where keys tend more often to be defined by their dominance than by their tonics, right? We don't really have in this opening phrase an A minor chord, but it looks as though we're pointing towards A minor, and if I play an abbreviated version of this, we can imagine the next point of arrival is here. But Wagner doesn't go there. In fact, he goes somewhere else. He continues. It's almost as if he transposes that first phrase. And so on. Okay, so we know that this is E dominant 7. This very famous chord, which is known as the Tristan chord, bears some closer examination, and I think I can, let's see, can I zoom us in? I know there's a way. A while back, the zoom function up top stopped working, but this one works, oddly enough. Maybe I'll click this. Anytime you click, just a review, anytime you click one of these, so it has a check mark, these menu items appear up top here. It's just convenient that way. So we're looking at this chord. From the bottom up, I see an F and a B and a D sharp and a G sharp. Now, if I tried to spin that into a 7th chord, the only one that would work is a G, B, D, F, right? So it would be G sharp and B, and then D sharp. That's G sharp minor. But then F is actually a diminished 7th. So this is not really any kind of G sharp 7th chord. It's close. If it were F sharp, then this would be G sharp minor with an F sharp in the bass. So this is odd, and if you remember the opening tempo, and we'll listen to it again in a moment, you know that this chord lasts a very, very long time. A very long time. We hear for a long time, and eventually. Now, if you've done some ear training before, if you're just using your ears now, you'll notice that this chord has a very, very specific sound that we actually have heard before. It's not that unusual. If you're saying to yourself, that sounds just like a half diminished chord, you're correct. And if we think about spelling this chord a little bit differently, right? So instead of these values, I'm going to just change the spelling a little bit. And if I had an F, and in fact, what I'll do, I'll tell you what I'll do. I'm going to create a new tab, and I'm going to go, not the New York Times, I'll create just a little sketch sheet for piano, right? This is in Note Flight, and I'll just copy this. And let's see, I think we want to just change the time signature here so it matches the other one. Let's move it to 6/8. Okay, and I'm just going to copy this in, and right next to it, this is that Tristan chord, right? That famous chord. If I just respelled it, right, so that I had F, actually, let's make that F, and I'll add a C flat above it, right? So C flat is the same note as B. I'm just spelling it differently. And up here, I'll put an E flat. Okay, E flat. And above that, I'll put an A flat. By the way, I'm adding that by just pushing Shift A. And while that note's highlighted, I'm going to push the minus. Okay, this is the same chord as this one in terms of how it sounds, but the function is very different. And this chord I could actually label F half diminished. And by the way, with my lead sheet marking here, I'm going to write F and then /O. And that's going to give me the half diminished sign when I push return, right? So this is not an unheard of chord, F half diminished, but in this particular instance, it's not functioning in any way that we have encountered it before. F half diminished has two possible functions. It could be 7 fully diminished, 7 half diminished seventh in the key of in the key of G flat major, or it could be 2 half diminished seventh in the key of E flat minor. but we're nowhere near either of those keys, right? We're actually looking like we're in the key of A minor. So this has puzzled theorists for a long time. And what some theorists say is, well, wait a minute. If you look at this note, this A, once that A comes into play, then we have a chord that we know quite well from last semester, right? Here's F. Now imagine in the key of A minor, F is lay, right? It's flat 6 in the bass. We've got B natural, which is re in the key of A minor. We've got D sharp, which is Fi. And if I include that A, we've got Do. Right? And moving on to this, we actually have, I hope you figured it out, take a moment. Do you know what that chord is? It is a French augmented sixth, right? And if I go back to my little sketch sheet over here, and I copy this one again, right? I'm going to take this, copy this measure over here just for sketching purposes, right? And now I want you to just imagine that this note never happened, right? We're just going to make that an A. I'm going to expand it with the right bracket, hit a dot. If this were the chord for the whole measure, this is a very clear French 6, right? French augmented 6 chord. We've got lay in the bass. We've got Fi in an upper voice. We've got Do in an upper voice. And re is the note that makes this a French augmented 6. It's an appropriate chromatic predominant chord. So some people have said, hey, what's really happening here is just this is a non-chord tone. It's coming from a place where, you know, it's not really coming from anywhere. So whether it's a passing tone or an appoggiatura, we don't know. But this is a kind of like a non-chord tone that then resolves here. And it's just a straight up French augmented 6. And people, you'd annotate that like this. You'd say, this is French 6. And we'd, you know, maybe color this and call this, I don't know what. We could call it maybe an incomplete neighbor. This is the chord tone, and then it resolves to 5/7. The problem with that analysis is, and now let's just listen to that opening bit one more time, because there is a problem with that analysis. See if you can figure out what it is. What do you think? I think the problem with that analysis is that this chord lasts a really long time. These are 5/8 notes at an incredibly slow tempo. So to say that this is just not really the chord tone, and this little eighth note that's clearly a sort of passing figure on the way towards B through this chromatic A sharp passing tone, it just seems to defy logic and also kind of musical sensibility. It doesn't really feel like that's the way this is working. And that is the problem with this chord. The other problem, in a way, is that it keeps recurring. If we look down here, you'll notice something, that this chord is an exact transposition of this chord up 3 semitones. So F here becomes A flat, that's up a minor third. B goes up to D. D sharp goes to F sharp, and G sharp goes to B. So our original chord is here. Our transposed chord is here. And that is another item of interest here, because Wagner is really treating that sonority as an idea and an entity unto itself. Now, generally in classical music, certainly in common practice theory, up until this point, we've only really spoken of chords in terms of their construction and their function, right? A dominant seventh chord is unstable. It needs to resolve because of that dissonant tritone and the dissonant seventh. A half diminished seventh chord, because of its construction, can be 7, or it can be 2 in a minor key. We haven't ever really talked of chords being valuable only for their sound as sonic entities. And that's an idea that's going to really come into play in the 20th century and in much of the theory that we're going to look at this semester. And this is so important, this Tristan chord. So let's reanalyze this now. We're going to not call this an incomplete neighbor. We're going to color these back. I'm sorry. We're going to instead, I'm going to color these two notes black. I'm going to color this note blue, and you'll find out that I have a little idiosyncrasy. I like to color unaccented non-chord tones, passing tones, and neighbors blue. I like the accented ones to be red. It's a feature of note flight that I like to take advantage of, and if for no other reason than to just keep in mind how often each of these are used and to see that visually. Right? I'm going to take this French 6 away, because now when I call this my passing tone, that's a passing tone. Now I'm saying this is the chord, and the only label I can give this chord is Tristan chord, or for short, we're just going to call it TC. That is not a Roman numeral. That's just a little idea. And this sonority exists throughout this piece as a kind of sonic trademark, or a sonic emblem, perhaps of longing or of unrequited love. And it's very, if we did an analysis of this whole piece, it'd be very interesting to sort of trace its journey along the way. So now, here we don't really have a chord. We'll call this a Tristan chord, and we'll say, however, that I will just note that we're in the key of A, let's put it here, A minor. All right, so we know we're in A minor. We've got the Tristan chord. We get to a 5/7. And the next thing that Wagner does, I'll let it continue a little bit here, after a long rest. There's that chord again. So if you take a look here, at the end of this E7, he takes chord tones from this chord, the B and the G sharp, and note that this is a major sixth. Over here it was a minor sixth, A to F, right? A to F. But now we have this major sixth, and it's almost as if the resonance of this E7 chord is picked up by Wagner, but then he goes in a different direction, right? Rather than resolving here, that G sharp falls, and we get another Tristan chord, right? And we saw that this Tristan chord was 3 semitones higher than this one. I'm going to introduce a new terminology here. I'm going to say that this is the TC, and I'm going to call this T3. And that's a term we're going to use all semester. And all that means is that this chord was transposed up 3 semitones. Now, T3 doesn't mean it's an exact pitch space transposition like this is, right? In other words, it would still be T3 even if these notes were here, but in a different spacing and a different arrangement. T3 refers to the pitch classes, the actual pitch classes regardless of octave. But I'll call this T3, and you see over here the same kind of thing. We've got an accented passing tone here. This chord eventually becomes G dominant seventh, and it looks really now like we're pointing to the other key represented by the key signature here. No sharps, no flats. Looks like we're headed maybe to C, right? So maybe over here we might say C colon 5/7, right? So take a moment and look at that and see if you understand that. And then as Wagner continues, he does the same thing. He takes the D and the B, a resonance of this 5/7 chord, and again, rather than, after this big G7 chord that we have, right, he gives us the resonance, we feel like it could go here to C major, but he doesn't. Right? He falls. He falls again. And this is the very last thing I want to look at right now, to this chord. On bar 10. And you'll notice here that this is not an exact pitch space transposition of this chord now, right? Or the first chord. Let's zoom out a little just so you can see that. This chord is F and B, a tritone, and here you've got C and F. So immediately we see this is a perfect fourth. This is not an exact transposition from F to C is a perfect fourth, but from B to F is a tritone. So these are not all transposed the same way. Yet this is a similar sonority, and if we listen to it again, maybe you can hear that also sounds like a half diminished seventh chord. It's not really spelled like any seventh chord. I mean, we can see G. We can't build a seventh chord. There's no B, right? D, F, but there's no A. If I start on the C, there's no E. If I start on the F, there's no A. So this doesn't really translate to any known spelling of a seventh chord. And yet, once again, we could conceivably respell this as a half diminished seventh chord. All we would need to do is change this G sharp into an A flat, right? So then we would have D, F, A flat, and C. Here it is in closed root position. That is that same Tristan chord. It's just rearranged here. It's just rearranged here. So if we think of this F up here becoming, in a way, it really becomes D, right? The F, because if we think of this as like a F half diminished seventh chord, and this is like a D half diminished seventh chord, right? So the F is transposed up a major sixth to become D, right? So then what's a major sixth higher than B? Well, that would be G sharp. There it is. What's a major sixth higher than D sharp? Then D sharp, that would be actually C, right? Or B sharp, right? And lastly, G sharp, a major sixth higher than that, would be E sharp or F, right? Take a moment, you can think about that. Each one of these notes corresponds to a note that's a major sixth lower somewhere in this chord. We're not going to use the term major sixth a lot this semester. Instead, we're going to think about that as being 9 semitones. So here I'm going to put this as TC, Tristan chord. This is T9 of the original chord. Now again, remember, it doesn't matter that the order is kind of mixed up, right? The spacing is kind of mixed up. That is a fair amount for your first class. If you need to watch this video twice, I understand. We are going to do a little bit more analysis with this in class when we meet, and then you're going to have some work. I'm going to share this with you as a worksheet, but for now, I'm going to leave it right about there. We will have a quiz on just this material, so be sure to watch this video and study up on this, and I will see you in class very soon.